get started. And welcome everybody to the Budget Advisory Commission. So we have switched back to having an in-person meeting option, so that's why a few of us are in the room. But obviously we still have our Teams option. Oh, good, Cameron was able to make it. And so we will proceed, going forward as hybrid meetings. So please feel free to come down to City Hall for our monthly meetings if you're available, or you can join on Teams. And I will do my best to monitor the chat. So please pipe in if I don't see you and you want to make a comment. So why don't we call this meeting to order? And then I will first do the land acknowledgement. If you give me just a second to pull that up. Actually, why don't we switch the order if we don't mind? If you want to do roll call first, and then I'll do the
Sure. Okay. Ms. Brawley?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Here.
Mr. Forbes?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Present.
Ms. Hobson?
Here.
Mr. Clouda? Mr. Minor? Ms. Reese?
Here.
Mr. Smallwood? Mr. Tamani?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lila. So we do have a quorum, and I'll also note that Mr. Clouda and Mr. Minor both had communicated they couldn't make it, so they would be excused. So I will go ahead and go back to do the land acknowledgement. So a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded land of the Dena'ina people and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of the land on which we all live. And then I'll also note for the Teams chat, since we have folks online, please thank you for joining this virtual Teams meeting as well as being in person. Please note the Teams chat is not part of the audio recording of the work session or the committee meeting or commission meeting in this case. To make the audio record as complete as possible, comments should be stated in the record, not placed in the chat. And so if you do make a comment in the chat, I'll ask you to say it out loud. But again, please use the chat to say that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, or you can use the raise hand function. Okay, with that, why don't we do approval of the agenda? So I'm looking for a motion in a second. I haven't heard anybody make a motion in a second yet.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second. This is Lindsay.
Okay, are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, not seeing any, then is there any objection to approval? Okay, we will consider the agenda approved. So next we'll move on to informational reports. And for the chair's report, I don't have anything in particular, just to say that we'll have a discussion a little bit later in the agenda. I was working with Nolan to draft a resolution for the group to consider regarding the AO 2022-75 property tax exemption to be proposed for the ballot this coming April. We did not get that draft done, so we can talk about it later, but that's the report. And so next we'll move on to assembly report. So I see we have Mr. Dunbar from the assembly. You want to give an update?
Thank you, Mr. Raleigh. Can everybody online hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, isn't it amazing? Now we can meet in person, yet people still choose not to, by and large. Very interesting use of our technology now. So a few things. The budget committee met, I believe it was almost 2 weeks ago now. And I don't want to completely step on Ms. Peterson's report and or OMB's report rather, but we heard from them and from the Treasury Department, the sort of top line issue was that there was a surplus based on a very strong showing from the rental car tax. And if you tried to rent a car in Anchorage this summer, you'll know that the prices became sort of outrageous. And that led to a real increase in the amount of rental car tax collected. We also had an increase in the amount of bed tax that was expected. And so there were some other revenues that came in soft, but all in all, it was about $11 million surplus. And that's important because there are some pressing issues. The administration has brought to us, for example, the rise of fuel costs. The last estimate we received from them at that hearing was about 3.5 million, I think it was, in additional fuel costs, primarily at the Anchorage Police Department and Transit, although it's across the board, but those were the two biggest. And then, of course, there are some repairs at the Sullivan Arena. And then there are some other smaller costs that we're looking to now, things that didn't make it into the ARPA distribution, for example. We just recently got a presentation from two Polynesian organizations who didn't make it into the ARPA distribution, but that some of my colleagues feel should have received funding. And so I'm actually going to premiere this here. You guys are the first ones to hear this in public. At next week's budget committee meeting, myself and my co-chair are planning to put forward some omnibus appropriations measures that we hope we can work with the administration to basically resolve several of these issues. There are a lot of these sort of different little moving pieces. People are talking about alcohol tax, ARPA distribution, general fund, and we haven't really had the coordination or the vehicle to talk about how we were actually going to resolve these things. And so we didn't, at least we haven't yet seen those kind of appropriation measures on the agenda. And so our plan is to put something forward on the 13th, I'm sorry, not the 13th, next week at the budget committee meeting, and then work with our colleagues. So we have to respect the Open Meetings Act. We can't do this via, behind the scenes. Work there and then with the administration and hopefully have pass that resolution at the second meeting in September. The other issue that we'll be dealing with next Tuesday, which Anna already mentioned, is the property tax exemption increase that was allowed by the bill that was sponsored by Senator Wielechowski. The S version is, I think it might already be on the addendum. If not, it should be soon. And that's sponsored by myself, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and Mr. Constant. And what we did is, so we not only increased from 50,000 to 75,000, we also increased the percentage limit from 20% to 40%. And we had a good work session last week with the municipal assessor and our own budget analyst, Desiree Camacho, and went through various tables to sort of see what would be the impact at 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, or even 100% exemption. Because the percentage is something that we impose in the municipality, not the state law. And so we sort of settled after a lot of discussion. My co-sponsors and I settled on 40%. We felt that did the best job of giving a large benefit to a large swath of people, where you'd have reduced taxes all the way up to, I think it was $800,000 of value. If you have an $800,000 home, you'd still get a tax cut from this, and everything below that. But the vast majority of the benefit would go to people that are in, from the 200 to 400,000 range, and so that was our intention, and that's what the S version will do. And yeah, with that, I'm open to any questions.
Okay, thank you. It looks like Lindsay has a question.
Yeah, actually, I have 2 questions now. So I work with another organization back to the ARPA funds, and they were denied. And I think that they've already sent a letter to the Assembly, but I was just curious if there was a criteria or anything published that they could turn to better understand why they did not qualify for the funds. Does the Assembly have anything like that?
Yeah, there was no sort of hard and fast criteria. We sort of set up a general framework. There were about 22 hours of work sessions, so you'd have to kind of go back from the beginning and then watch 22 hours of debate, there was no hard and fast criteria. We tried to go to as many organizations as possible, but I think there was also a feeling of, there were 4 kind of general categories, affordable housing, childcare, economic development, and I'm trying to remember what the 4th was, but there were these 4 general categories, and then beyond that, I think there was a desire to give it to new organizations. That wasn't always the case, and then to be honest, there was quite a lot of sort of regionalism. Like the Eagle River Chugiak folks voted for the every Eagle River Chugiak project, and that kind of tilted things a little bit. And so there ended up being, I think, more projects that were sort of specific to Eagle River Chugiak or South Anchorage. And for example, there's only one project that's sort of that's actually like physically in East Anchorage. But there's a lot of general programs like the $8 million for childcare or the $12 million for homelessness that we think will sort of benefit the bowl more generally. So I'm sorry, there was no hard and fast criteria, I guess, is the short answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. And my second question, if I could continue.
Can I say one last thing on that? Lindsay, I'm sorry. We got $210 million of requests, I think, or $210 to $240 million of requests. We had $50 million to distribute. I mean, that's also the short answer why a bunch of organizations ended up not getting funding.
No, I definitely understand that and appreciate the time and effort that went into considering the request. I think that some of these organizations are sort of looking at how can we improve for next time, and I guess this is just a unique instance. So, and maybe they just didn't quite fit in the boxes that you guys were looking at. So, my second question is I happened to watch the work session yesterday about the tax exemption, and I mean I watched about the first half of it, and I really thought that your idea was interesting about the 100% exemption and just leaving it at the cap. And the follow-up comment from the assessor was that, I mean, even as somebody with $175,000 or $150,000 will get that 100% exemption. And so I was just wondering if you did find out what the impact would be if you remove the percentage and just kept it at the $75,000 cap. Just because it seems like people who have less than $150,000 assessment on their home really benefit from it the most. And so I was just wondering what the city impact is.
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you exactly what the difference was. You ended up with a smaller benefit, obviously, to some of the other folks who had like $200,000 and $300,000 homes. But you're right, there were people who I think there were actually more $100,000, all the way up to, or $75,000 condos, for example. I think there are relatively few left, but there are still these condos where you'd be paying almost no property taxes. And a lot of seniors, of course, because you can stack the 150 on the 75, there are seniors up to whatever the math would be, 200,000 or so would be paying no property taxes. And so it's funny, I didn't have a really strong policy reason not to do that. I just sort of worried that there was going to be some unintended consequences. And that also, if we allowed the benefit to go, a little bit more of the benefit to go to folks that are kind of a little bit more in the middle of the income curve, that it would have a better chance of passing at the ballot. I mean, that's some of the reality too. And I'll say they actually found, when they originally passed it, the cap, the percentage cap was an artifact it was a creation of Anchorage, not of the state. And if you go back and look at the debates, they were talking about, well, we shouldn't allow all of these homes to not pay any property tax because then they feel like not invested in the community. I don't know how much water that really holds, but that's certainly that was the justification of the cap originally.
Got it. Thanks. Thank you for that, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Next we have Robin. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Dunbar. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So the feedback you gave on the 40% up to 75,000, I wondered, would you be able to, or when would we expect to have that illustrated as far as what you saw in the benefit? Because I am concerned when I look at that where, I know middle class is constantly shifting, but when you start to see a very minimal benefit already in the 30%, when you get to the 500, 600,000 range, if you go to 40, that's going to drift. And I think you're going to lose some voter support from people who ultimately still are working hard, middle-class people who, do happen to have a little bit of value in their home. I think you'll lose some support if you go too high on the percentage.
Yeah, I don't have the, I thought they had posted those. Are you looking at, did they post those tables?
I'm looking at the PowerPoint that was utilized in the work session that only went up to 30%. I haven't seen any update. If I missed it, I apologize.
Yeah, there was a 50% at the work session. They also presented 50%, so that should be on there too. And so we kind of hit obviously in between those two numbers. I'll say that the difference between 30, 40, and 50 is actually not that dramatic. And even all the way up to 100 is not that dramatic. It gets back to what Lindsay was saying. Because there are relatively few homes that fall in that very low value, there are relatively few homes that are less than 200,000 anymore. Even condos, there are relatively few less than 100,000. So the difference between 30 and 40 and 50 is not that dramatic. And so I think that the benefit to folks in the 600,000 and 700,000 range, again, off the top of my head, or maybe 500,000 and 600,000 range, is only slightly different between 30 and 40%.
Okay.
But yeah, while we do other presentations, I'll try to maybe I'll send Anna the documents that I had. You guys can look at them.
Okay, thank you. And I think also I'll just mention, later on today's agenda, we have discussing, this proposal and then whether the BAC wants to take any action on it. So we can also go back to that topic too. And I appreciate that folks have made time and looked at the materials from the work session and watched the video. Are there any other questions for Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, this is Al. I think what you probably need to do as an extension of your study, how is that going to affect the funds for the police and fire? That's what we need to have a look at, because that's a pretty good chunk of your budget. And when you eliminate those amounts, what effect is that going to have on the money available for police and fire?
Al, do you mean, are you saying that when more property value is exempted, that it shifts the responsibility to others, or is that what you're referring to? Not having enough for the general government budget?
Well, let's just say it's $50 million. And let's say that 25% of that is police and fire. How are we going to cover that?
So I guess I should be clear that this doesn't reduce the total amount of property taxes collected. So what happened last year is we had this really unique situation where the residential valuations shot up. We had this huge jump in residential valuations all over the city. Simultaneously, we had a number of commercial properties fall in value. And so what we had is a huge shift of property tax burden onto residential property taxpayers. The actual amount of property taxes stayed pretty static. It went up just a little bit, but really not that much. The mill rate fell. So the mill rate fell, but valuations increased. And so particularly people at the lower end of the spectrum, around the 200,000, 300,000 home range, who were claiming the senior and the residential property tax exemption, they saw significant increases in their taxes last year. And so what this does more than anything else is kind of rebalances that. So the residential property taxpayers will be paying a little bit less, and the commercial property taxpayers will be paying a little bit more. But it doesn't reduce the total amount of property taxes collected. And really, for a lot of residential property taxpayers, it just gets them back to zero. it gets them back to where they were before the value of the exemption fell this year.
Well, I think also we have to recognize that there's a big difference on the interest rates now for houses, house mortgages. So I think that's something you probably should have a look at also.
That's true. If the value of residences falls really significantly, then you will have a sort of rebalancing as well. But for now, I'll just tell you, I got a lot of emails, partly driven by, honestly, the letter that the mayor sent out was really misleading. It confused people as to why their property taxes were going up. They thought it was because of some giant spike in the budget. There was no large spike in the budget, and there really was almost no difference between the mayor's budget and the assembly passed budget, right? I think there was something like a $4 million difference, and he was claiming a $50 million benefit that the people of Anchorage were somehow missing out on. If you did the math there, really what was driving the property taxes for folks was the assessments, was the valuations that of course are rightfully out of the hands of politicians. They're done by the assessor's office. And that caused a lot of people's property taxes to go up. And so we got a ton of emails. And when we dug into it, we found that a lot of people actually, that they thought their property taxes going up, they emailed us, we looked up their property and their property taxes actually gone down. But because the mill rate fell. But for people they were all upset by this misleading letter. But the people who were in the sort of 200,000 to 400,000 band, or 200,000 to 350, especially seniors, when we looked up their taxes had indeed increased, and it was almost entirely driven by a fall in the value of the exemption. And so that's what's driving this.
I seem to notice on my property taxes, and especially, on vacant property, it went up about 25%. And our residents, it also went up. So I guess that, when we talk about property taxes, we also have to talk about maybe some things that we could adjust the spending on. Where can you cut expenses and still achieve, the same result?
It's a great idea, Al, and we are always open to that. If you can find a place where we can have real savings, I mean, absolutely. I'm all about efficiencies. But you brought up police and fire. Police, fire, and road maintenance is 60% of our budget, right there. I mean, I assume you don't want us to cut the police department, right?
We don't want that, and they should not be cut. In fact, when you take a look at
Sorry, Al, if I can cut in, because I want to make time for the other items on our agenda. So I was going to ask Robin, is your question about the property tax exemption or another item?
Okay, good.
No, my question was already answered. My hand's just still sitting there.
Okay. Okay, no problem. So I'm going to suggest that we move on, because we do have this specific item later in the agenda, and I want to be mindful of our time. So thank you, Ms. Dunbar, for attending, and we'll come back to the topic of the property tax exemption. Next, we have the ASD report. So we have, it looks like Jim from the school district, as well as Kelly from the school board. So welcome. Please go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of this week's board meeting. We are looking at a projected $68 million budget deficit for next school year. And it's a result really of the state keeping the amount of money we get per student the same since fiscal year 17. So we've had federal relief dollars, we've had state one-time funding that have helped us get through the last several 3 to 4 years. But at the end of this year, we will have spent the bulk of the federal relief money, which is going to leave us with a pretty significant deficit next year. You'll see this rolling out every 2 weeks. We'll be briefing the board with updated potential options. So between now and December, the board will start providing them more information on everything from costs of unique programs like Ignite or Immersion, 6th grade band and orchestra, all the other special programs. We'll be talking about things like ASDV and staffing levels and school closures or potential closures, as well as cost avoidance for things that were budgeted this year that maybe we can conserve those funds and apply them towards next year. So I did want to give this particular committee a good heads up that right now we're not in the phase where anything that comes up publicly to the board is district recommendations for board decisions. We're really starting to lay out all of these different things over the course, again, of the next 2 to 3 months, that by December 20th is the last board meeting. We'll be asking for board guidance as we go into budget build in January. It'll be very public this year. Our first survey will hit the streets this Friday. There will be surveys every month. And because it's going to be so public, that also means that misinformation will flow on social media. And I thought it was important, not just for Kelly, but for everyone to understand, if you hear that the district is recommending anything at this point, that would be an inaccurate statement, regardless of where they heard it. We are just starting to lay out programs, and as we lay them all out and then start prioritizing the board and asking for their thoughts and decisions, then yes, at that point that'll be true, but it's probably in the November timeframe. So I'm not an anti-social media person, but I know the definition of truth has multiple different definitions, and I just wanted to make that clear today. And I can be followed obviously by Ms. Lessons as well.
I have a question.
Sorry, there was somebody in the queue before you, and I also need to recognize that we were joined by James Smallwood earlier in the meeting. Sorry for not noticing that before. And I wonder if we could hold questions until after Ms. Lesson's report, and then I see Rob, you had your hand up first, so and then Al. So go ahead, Kelly.
Sure, thank you so much. Jim really stole all of my thunder. He's also the provider of the thunder as far as getting the board updates. It's going to be a really hard fall as we're confronted again and again with options that are going to be near and dear to parents' hearts, students' hearts, taxpayers' hearts. You know, if we end up talking about school closures, that is going to really deeply affect people who live in those particular zones. And then, of course, those schools would have to be, the students in those schools would have to be reallocated to other schools. So it's kind of like, you know, when you drop a rock in the pond, the ripples are just going to extend out. So I'm deeply appreciative of the work that Jim and his team are doing. It's my general understanding that we're going to get more than $68 million worth of options, or at least $68 million worth of options to close this gap. And I don't really have any more to add. I am looking forward to the survey going out. And I think that there will be additional surveys, maybe town halls, as we move forward. So there will be public input that is welcomed and encouraged along the way. So that's about all I have. The next finance meeting will be September 14th. So the board work sessions at 4 p.m. bi-monthly on Tuesdays, and then the finance meetings, I think, are where a lot of the conversations are going to be held throughout the fall.
Okay, thank you for your report. It looks like we were also joined by Andy Ratliff, but I will ask if folks have questions, and I know Rob, you had a question, and then Al, so go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks, Jim, and thanks, Kelly. The one thing, Jim, I understand the flat funding since 17 and that being part of the issue. And then, you know, we've certainly burnt through the funding from the emergency funding. But I think one of the important things that at the very least during difficult discussions like this that should be forefront in the conversation is what is the enrollment drop and what are some of the increases in funding needs coming from? So you know, we need to address the whole issue and not just funds that we don't have to pay for the things that we want to keep. But I know there is a reality of low enrollment, and that you know, you're taking that base number and the allocation per student. It's not just a one component math problem. So I would hope that we can include that in our discussion to be on top of the actual details.
Robin, that's a great comment. About a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I did brief the board and showed them a timeline of an enrollment drop of approximately 5,000 students over from 2013 to now. So really about 10 years. And that drop of 5,000 means that we have 18 schools under 65% capacity. And of course, we have those long-term capital costs for those buildings, some of them needing significant money applied toward them if we were to rebuild or replace or refurbish those structures. So that really was part of the impetus, is not just saving money, but right-sizing the district structure to make sure that we're optimizing where we're putting scarce resources. For instance, if you have 5 schools that all need one particular type of occupational therapist, but you only have 4 of them. Whenever you start having less schools, even though you still don't have enough OTs, now there's a better chance that you can focus resources and have a better chance of being able to use them around the district. So there's so many different reasons why school closures do make sense. We also understand that within almost every community in the city, almost everyone will agree that schools should be closed, but not theirs. Any other school but theirs, in fact, and it's always the heart and soul of their area. But they do agree that someone else's school should close. So we are looking at everything from transportation, long-term capital, annual maintenance costs, utility costs, busing options, because some schools would require an inordinate increase in the number of buses to be able to close certain schools over other schools. Some of them have programs that probably are not going to go away, like IB or maybe an immersion program or something where we know those are just not palatable for the community. So the list of things we have to look at to be able to narrow down the number of schools to a small enough number to detailed analyses is pretty large. And these are going to be very public discussions with the board, because I can't imagine giving Kelly a list of 8 schools or 4 schools to close and her saying why and me telling her, well, just trust me. I mean, this will be very public, right? And we're going to have to show them all the different things that we looked at and why we chose those specific schools and where those kids are going to go and what additional supports are going to be needed at the gaining schools to receive them, welcome them into their world, and make sure that at the end of the day, maybe it started about money and building capacity, but it is about kids. And it might be that we have to spend more money at gaining schools because of unique needs of these children. And it's very complicated process. And so I think the school closure discussions will be very public, probably starting the second board meeting in October, all the way up until asking the board to vote and on which schools they're going to be okay with in December on the 20th, because in January we have to build a budget and we need to know which schools are in the budget and which ones aren't. So this is a 3.5-month process with school board members, and it will be very public. As Kelly said, town halls at every closing school, so parents from gaining schools can come and fortunately, we were able to get repetitive experience at town halls for building closures after the earthquake between Eagle River Elementary and Greening, and we have a lot of not quite PTSD, but we did some things wrong, and this time we're going to do them better.
Well, I don't envy it. I don't envy that process you got to go through, and I appreciate the response.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Al, you had a question?
I just had a question. I noticed that you had received about $184 million in COVID-19 funds from the feds. How much of that do you have left?
By the end of this year, we're going through a review over the next 4 weeks of everything that we had budgeted for this year And if there's something that we're going to recommend to the board that we not spend it and save it for next year, that would help soften fiscal year 24's deficit. So I'll be able to give you a much more accurate number. It's very early in the school year to project what will be spent out by June 30th, right? We normally do our projections for June 30th and December timeframe because we haven't even had our first teacher payroll run yet. So it's a little early for me to project 8 months out at this point. But I know that in about 4 weeks or maybe less, we'll be going back to the board saying we budgeted boom, 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 and we're recommending not to do A or B or to reduce C and conserve those funds into FY24. What I'll tell you is that when we do that, it means the same conversations we're having this year are going to be made next year for fiscal year 25 if the legislature can't fix inflation-proofed education funding. So you are just kicking the can down the road whenever you do cost avoidance in this year. But it does give the legislature time and space to maybe find a solution. They're going to they'll convene in mid-January as they do every year, but this is the first year of a 2-year session. Depending on the November elections, if it's like the last session, they didn't even form the House until the end of February. Our budget will have been passed before they even formed the legislature. So there's no possible chance the legislature is going to increase funding between now and the time Kelly and her 6 friends on the school board approve our budget. So what we expect to happen is as soon as we approve it, we start briefing the contingency plans and the priorities for what can we bring back legitimately if the state provides either a long-term fix during that session or one-time money. What would be the priorities for one-time money? And those will be additional briefings with the board from March through May, because realistically, we usually get additional state money approved in May, June timeframe, which is 3 to 4 months after the Assembly has passed our annual budget.
Okay, thanks, Jim, and we appreciate the update, and I know there's going to be a lot of work ahead and certainly difficult discussions, so thank you very much. So I'd like to keep us moving at this point because we have a couple items for discussion and in-depth review. So next, let's go to the OMB report, and I just want to note we are not joined today by Courtney Peterson because she has her confirmation hearing shortly downstairs from this building in about 10 minutes. And so we instead have Marilyn and Lila from OMB, and we asked, especially because we have so many new members, that we have a budget one-on-one presentation. So this is preparing for the budget this fall, which is supposed to come out at the end of September, early October. And so in the meantime, this is just an educational session to help orient folks to how to read the budget, where to look in terms of highlights, and then getting us ready for that discussion. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Marilyn Bonzoff, Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you for having me here. May I start with, before we go into the Budget 101, may I start with our budget to actuals?
Sure.
So we'll just do a brief preliminary view of our August budget to actuals. I think as a body, you've seen the monthly budget to actual status. So,
oh, and I'm sorry, for those online, would you mind sharing documents?
Oh, do we have?
Yeah, sorry, I know we have.
No, I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
Do you got it okay, or is it something I should do?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the July report should be submitted to the Assembly in September, so that'll be public, but it was already gone over in the previous meeting. The August data is preliminary for actuals. And one thing to note for the August data is that all of the departments are still at or under the 5% through, or at or under 5% over the percent through the year. So none of the departments are over the percent through the year to where they have to be reported on. There's several that are under, but that doesn't mean that they won't catch up by the end of the year. But that's just the statistical place that they're at this point in time in August. There are, although you know, that statistical picture seems not so bad, there are some watch items like Assemblymember Dunbar mentioned where we have some fuel concerns that we're watching, and then towing for the police. And we're also at this time requesting projections from the departments to see what their projections are for how they're anticipating to end the year. With the expectation that they'll still manage to their appropriated spend budgets. But we'll definitely keep you apprised if there are any anticipated anomalies. Any questions?
Let's see, I don't see any yet. I guess just to restate, it sounds like you said generally a lot of departments are under and then none of them are significantly over at this point.
Correct. They're not. Oh, so per code or per our process, we report. Yeah, they're within range. Most of them are within range or under.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and I know as always, we send out the documents afterwards as well, so folks can take a look and
Great.
follow up with any questions.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're available. Thank you. Okay, so then the next bit is a Budget 101. It's always been my dream to do a nice presentation for how our whole budget process works, but that's a dream that I have yet to realize. So I'll try to show our work product, explain how we get there, and if you have questions, let me know as we go. My first question to you, though, is do you have any questions that you'd like answered? Right. Do you have questions of me right now that you want me to make sure to go over before I start just going over our process and our product?
I guess I'll ask members, raise your hand or put in the chat if you do have questions. I think one thing is just to make sure people are clear, you know, which documents or which pages, like which specific reports are really kind of the high level, like where can I find,
Okay.
you know, in a proposed budget, where am I gonna find the big changes from last year, for example?
Okay.
I wonder if you could send me a link to the budget.
Yes.
Yeah, if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, and do you mean the current, the FY22 budget?
The what? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're saying this year's budget, the FY22 budget?
Yes,
Okay.
Okay, so can I drive here?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll share my screen and then I will. Window. The window, does that keep the recording?
Oh, it's fine.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
I think I just won't be able to see the folks online, but that's fine.
Sorry.
And I did see a note from Rachel, so she's interested in seeing the current budget, so we should definitely send that to all members, just where to find that. And then the proposed FY23 budget, maybe you can just cover like when we'll see that.
Okay.
Because I know that's not available yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And in anticipation of folks showing up in person, but we'll also have we have all these materials online. So we're starting with the.
You're sharing.
Oh no, sorry.
Oh yeah, that one looks like maybe you're still sharing.
Which one is it?
I'm on here too.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Lila. Sorry, I'm experiencing a couple technical issues. Do you want to? Yeah, sorry. I'll defer to the expert. Right now, we are developing the 2023 budget. We start with, so what we're developing at this time are our general government enterprise, and utilities operating and capital budgets for next year, and then also the plans for 6 years out. Our focus for this meeting, I'll show you how to get to the presentation material, or our materials we have available to the public. It starts with muni.org. We go to departments over on the upper right-hand side of the screen.
Okay.
We scroll down to the management and budget department and click on it.
Okay.
And then once we're in the management and budget department, you can see there's a gray header bar that will show, you can click to operating budgets and capital budgets.
Okay.
Before you do pick either one of those, we also keep our current budget just on our face page. One of the things that we've already started for 2023 is we presented our 120-day memo that gives a preliminary revenue picture, preliminary tax cap, service priority narratives, and the utility enterprise strategic and business plans, and we'll be putting that on our board here. But
Okay.
what we'll do for the budget 101 is start with just the operating budgets, and we're going to go over. So I'm going to scroll down to see 2022, and we'll just look at a couple key items with it. The development of each, okay, so boy, online, with the operating budgets, you can pick the budget year that you want to look at. And so what I'll do is I'll pick the 2022 budget for operating. And then within it, you'll see different links. They're kind of chronologically, the latest is on top. But starting down below, we'll have our preliminary revenue and budget notice, which is our 120-day memo for the 2022 fiscal year. And then it goes to proposed and approved. And I'm just going to click on the proposed document is the document that first is submitted to the assembly. That then goes through possible S version changes and then assembly amendments to get to the approved. They're similar documents, but the approved shows any changes from proposed. So we'll click on that. And what I want to start with is within this document, it has an introduction. It shows the assembly documents that we submitted that went through this process, 6-year fiscal program, overview of the budget, which has a couple of features that do show overall the changes from the last budget iteration to this iteration, revenue details, and then it goes into the actual department details. So that's what we'll look at too. I'm going to scroll down first to the appendices. And I want to start, though, by showing the calendar. Our calendar is, in policies and procedures. And I believe it's a little slow. Sorry about this. And there we go. So this is our calendar, and where every year we start with a budget calendar that shows our plan of the things we have to get done and when we're going to do them by. And it really is developed by starting with when we have to get these things done, which the codified deadline for us to submit our budget to the assembly is 90 days before the end of the year. And so basically October 2nd, we work back from there. And then So right now, we're working toward what October 2nd is on, I think, a Sunday this year. And so we anticipate submitting our budget, the 2023 budget, to the Assembly by September 30th of this year.
Okay.
So this calendar is what we have for 2022. It goes through the process. The process that we start with developing each budget is we start with what we call a continuation budget for development of 23, which is the previous revised budget, which starts with the previous year's revised budget. And then we roll it to the budget year. And the roll, it consists of adjusting the labor to be the work hours in the budget year, the collective bargaining agreement, pay scales are adjusted to go to the next year. Also within continuation, which continuation is basically the budget year's, the current year's activities at the budget year's costs. We also, and projected revenues. The continuation results are evaluated for balancing and then possible program changes. And then the details are presented to the public via assembly documents, publications, and work sessions. And those items are included in our calendar. So what are the exciting things to see? I'm just going to use up in the upper left-hand part of the screen, there's an arrow, and I'm going to arrow back. And so the things that I printed that I thought were exciting are also included in this published book. In our overview, there is a table that will show how this budget, and then this is our 2022 budget, and it'll show how this budget evolved from the 2021 revised budget. And this is a process we go through every year. There's our lovely tax cap. Sorry about this scrolling. Okay. In the overview, on page 18 of the overview, what we show here is rows that represent the departments, and this is the build of the expenditure spend for general government from 2021 revised, the components that we go through or the adjustments we go through to get to our continuation. And I'm just going to increase this a little bit so I can actually see it.
And can you explain what continuation is too?
Oh, yes, sorry. So continuation is how we are, how the municipality builds our budgets. And it is basically, we take the last revised budget iteration, and it's that budget programs at the next year's or the budget year's costs. So we increase those, or we adjust the current year programs to the budget year's costs. CPI adjustments are made where contractual necessary, but the majority of those changes really occur in the labor, also in the debt service. So there's a couple components that do get changed through the continuation. It's just that the prior year's budget, revised budgets programs at the new year, the budget year's projected costs. Oops, sorry about the scroll. So that gets us to continuation. And this table here shows just the expenditures, but once we get to continuation as part of the budget development, we also have the revenues, and with all budgets, we have to have them balanced. And so depending on where the continuation expenditures land and where the projected revenues land, that's where the programs are evaluated and possibly changed. That is what becomes the mayor's proposed budget. So for 2022, we can see by category, there's actually right here, we did it by department. There's multiple different changes from continuation to the mayor's proposed budget that are above that are beyond the continuation activity. And they include, so with 21, there was a lot of activity. All the different activity is explained in this narrative, but then also by department, we can see that. And I'll show a department's reconciliation. So that might be a little more easy to read. I prefer this as an overall schedule to show how we evolved from the last year's revised budget to get to the mayor's proposed budget. And then once it is proposed, presented to the public, the assembly may make amendments to it, and then it becomes the approved budget. I'm gonna just arrow back once, and up in upper left-hand corner to arrow back out of the overview. And then I'm just gonna pick a department. And then within each of these departments, they also have their own reconciliation. I'll choose management and budget. Each department section will show the department's org structure, where they are in the organization, and then a narrative of what we do, an overall overview of what we do, and then also how what we do helps achieve the mayor's mission. We'll have a report on so within each department section, there will be a department summary report that will show the actuals for the last closed year, the revised budget that rolled to the proposed budget, and then the proposed budget. Those will be the columns, and then you'll have, depending on on the department summary, it'll show the direct cost and the divisions within the department. And the direct cost is the labor, non-labor contracts that the department that add up to the amount that's appropriated and that the department manages to. So when we get to, when we say our budget to actuals, this direct cost total is where we report to the, where we report the budget to actuals against, just so you know. Then beyond that, there's intergovernmental charges, and then also departmental revenues included in this report. And then the direct costs are also then parsed out by, whereas in the top section, they're parsed out by division. This bottom section of the department summary, they're parsed out by category of direct cost. So you'll see these two direct cost rows are the same, and then also will include the positions that are included in each department. The position count, the budgeted position count. But what I really wanted to show you again is within each department, after the department summary sheet, we'll see the reconciliation of how the budget evolved from the direct cost budget starts with the prior year revised, direct cost and position counts. any changes as part of continuation, and the majority of the changes in continuation are just that roll of salaries to, from one year to the next, to include the collective bargaining agreements, the medical changes, personnel changes projected for the next year, to get to the continuation level. And then from the continuation level is where the mayor's proposals are presented and identified. So so within each department, we show this reconciliation of the budget changes.
So I'll see if anybody has questions so far, because I know,
Okay.
we're not going over the full content of the budget, but just giving folks
Okay.
an orientation toward, how to read it and where to look and to use the current budget as an example. So-
Okay,
So I don't see any questions, but please speak up if you do have any.
yep, any questions?
Okay.
Okay,
So far, and I guess maybe to restate, so where you guys are at right now for looking at next year's budget is, you've got the actuals from 2021, so that kind of is a baseline.
Yep.
And we have the budget now, which we're in the middle of spending, obviously, as a city. And then you guys are working on, if we didn't make any changes to the budget and it just continued to next year, that's the continuation. to
yes,
say-
yeah,
To say any required changes that aren't policy decisions.
Yes.
right? Okay.
yes,
And then also looking at how much revenue we expect to continue to balance it that way.
Yep.
And then, and so then the next piece is kind of the policy proposals or changes to the budget, which is beyond what that default would be, is that right?
yes,
And that's
yes,
what the mayor's gonna be proposing
yes.
in a month or less than a
Yeah,
month.
in less than a month, and it is presented to the assembly, and then there's a couple work sessions that we do have included on our calendar, and then approval, and then assembly amendments possibly, and then approval by the assembly. Then that's all done before the year starts, and then we start over again. And then that's when we start developing our revised budget. Before I start talking about the revised budget, any questions on the proposed to approved process? And are we doing okay with time?
I think so, yeah, I think if we can spend about 5 more minutes on this, then move to the next item.
Okay,
But I think, and I don't see any other questions, so yeah, if you could cover the revised budget piece too.
okay, I'm gonna arrow back, upper left-hand corner. And I'm gonna scroll up and actually arrow back, I think, one more time. And so we started with proposed, approved, and then I'm going to our 2022 revised budget document. And what the revised budget does is, again, it's done in the spring of each year, and it is a refinement of the budget, especially the revenues, and we, as with all of our budget creations, we start with our calendar, and our calendar is basically we start with our deadline, which our objective for the revised budget is to ensure that we have our numbers firmed up to get to the established mill rates for the taxing that funds that year's budget. And so our calendar for the year backs into having our budget presented to the assembly by the first meeting in April, usually, with the expectation it is approved by the last meeting in April, and then giving the Treasury Department, I think, time to get the tax bills out. So within first quarter, that refinement, we set the mill rates, but also part of that refinement, we have more information on how the prior year ended, where the importance of knowing how the prior year ended is helps. We use that in the prior year end financials to help us set our fund balance reserve amounts. And that's another part of the first quarter budget. It's, you know, throughout the year, we're telling you how the expenditures look, the budget to actuals on expenditures look, and then Treasury's telling you how the actuals to budget for revenues look. We don't really know how that all comes. We see how that all comes together after the finance department actually evaluates them, probably in the spring, to see where our real net savings or costs may be in order for us to set our fund balance reserves for that budget, the next budget year. The taxes, or the tax setting for first quarter, or the tax setting for each year, is really more set in during first quarter. During first quarter, we show our tax limit, which is developed by including all the taxes for the city. So the limit for all the taxes of the city, which start with the prior year taxes, adjusted by population, inflation, a couple other charter requirements to get to the total taxes that can be collected. And then we reduce the total taxes that can be collected by the non-property taxes. And then what falls out of that are the property taxes that can be collected. And so that's where Mr. Dunbar was saying that the total taxes that can be collected aren't going to change, you know, if we're talking about this other topic of property tax exemptions. It's just that total bucket of money doesn't change because it's set by the tax cap. It's just who pays it is your other topic. But the final setting of that tax cap is in the first quarter, during the first quarter budget process. A table that we include during first quarter, which I do like, is another summary table that shows the development of the budget but not by department, but by fund. And the funds in the general government operating typically represent service areas that are geographical areas that are taxed for the services that they receive. And so we do keep track of each of these service areas, how much they are costing us, and then the taxes that come in. And this chart actually shows by fund, by general government fund, how the costs, the change in costs from approved to revised, the intergovernmental charges, which are overhead charges, I guess you can say, to get to a function cost, which is also what we present by fund in our assembly documents. And then the revenues that will support it, fund balance that will support it. And then what falls out is the tax cost by fund. And in this chart, we also have the assessed values to get to the mill rates that are going to be assessed by those funds, for those funds. So this is, in my opinion, another exciting picture of how the budgets develop for the city, and what falls out of it is the mill rate by fund. If I may do, so that's about the exciting high level things. One thing that I'd like to go back to, and I apologize, I'm going to go back to the 2022 proposed budget. And what I would like to show you is the product that we're, not only is this budget book coming out for 23, but our assembly documents that come out, they also do have, in my opinion, a nice summary and walk through, of how the budget's developed. And it is kind of another high level look, but it's more by, so for 20, it's kind of by iteration. So I will go to our 23 3 approved book, assembly documents, and then within these assembly documents, what we're going to present for, there was a lot of action, sorry about this, there was a lot of action in our 2022 budget that may not happen, or pardon me, that I need to get to first. The budget document that will show so what starts as, again, sorry, is the proposed budget document. I'm trying to get to it. I apologize. Again, exciting times. Oh. We do try, so when we put these publications out, we do try to show all of the assembly actions and activity that occurred during the budget development process up to approved. But what we'll be submitting to the assembly and the public by for the 23 budget will be an ordinance that looks very much like this, and it will show the new direct cost budgets and debt service for the upcoming budget year. This is the 2022 budget document, and you can see the strike-throughs where there were changes from the proposed budget to the final approved budget. That's what these strike-throughs and bolds show. So this is where the direct cost budgets are presented in this document. And then so those direct costs are the labor, non-labor, contractual service, kind of the manageable budget for the departments. The next section in this document shows what we call the function cost. So again, that's the direct cost net of IGCs to get to the function cost. IGCs are the charging of central services out to the departments and funds that actually benefit from those services. So like the cost of OMB get IGC'd out to all departments. And so that would be a credit to the operating fund that we're in, but then a charge to some of this other service areas like police, fire, et cetera. So that's what these function costs are. Next, we also have other sections that present additional budget actions, but probably the more, and then the alcohol tax, including the alcohol tax. But part of this document is where I wanted to get to. Another picture of the changes of how the budget's developed. This is what we call the AM support, and it starts with the prior year's the prior year's revised budget. We do summed netted rows for the continuation activity. And then we go into the summarized line items of the mayor's proposed changes to the budget. And so this is another good in my opinion, a nice high-level document that can walk you through how the budget changed from revised to continuation to proposed, and then once it does go through the assembly amendments, it will also include assembly amendments. So that's one other place where you can see that budget movement, or pardon me, how the budget changes through the budget development process.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Marilyn. So I'll see if anybody has questions, and of course, we're not getting into the details of the content of this year's budget, but really just looking at orienting ourselves and getting ready for next month. So I don't see any raised hands. Yeah, so I think then, thank you for your presentation very much. And
Thank you for the opportunity.
yeah, and then if staff can send out after our meeting, doesn't have to be today, but just a reminder, link to those documents, and then maybe just a short list of, not every single form or anything, but just, where you were mentioning kind of the high level, what are the most important
Okay.
to look at?
Okay, we'll do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then we do, so we're noticed until 1. I was going to ask if folks are okay with us ending a little bit early today. I need to leave for a meeting, and so I won't be able to chair. So I wonder if we could go for about 8 or 9 more minutes and then sign off by 12:55. So with that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the department assignments. And that was just a brief update. So thank you again to Lila and staff for sending out invitations to our department heads. And I just want to see maybe a show of hands, how many people have been able to schedule at least one meeting? Okay, I see one anyway. I know I was able to do one, and I know we have a few folks who aren't here today. Have anybody completed a meeting yet? Okay, so a couple folks, and I know Lila is available to help schedule those. I actually was able to do the health department meeting yesterday, which was great. So hopefully folks are finding that helpful or going to find it helpful. So just a reminder, we don't have a hard deadline on that, but we are trying to get it done. Giving folks opportunity to have those discussions this fall. And we know we're going to run into the budget process pretty soon. So again, if you have not made time for that yet, please follow up with Lila. Oh, great. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, thanks for the status update. And then, of course, we have our questions if those are helpful for folks to use in your meetings. And then Lila can help with scheduling, or you're welcome to reach out directly if you know who your departments are. So anyway, so we'll check in on that next time. And then hopefully we'll have a chance to also share folks' insights or thoughts from your meetings. That would be great. So with that, let's move on to the property tax exemption. So I wanted to do a check-in. So originally, Vice Chair Nolan Claudia and I had talked about drafting a resolution, putting forward a few different options for the BAC to consider in terms of if we want to take a position on this. Of course, this property tax exemption is something that is on the Assembly's agenda for September 13th, next Tuesday, so they could take action before we'd have a chance to act. And Lila, if you can know, it looks like Rob had a question about scheduling in the chat, but you maybe follow up directly. So anyway, so there may be a vote on it, but essentially this is something that would go on the ballot if it is approved for voters. And so it's also something that is not just an Assembly action, but it would be something that we would all have a chance to vote on if it does pass. So I just want to open it up for our last few minutes for discussion. Are folks interested in the BAC taking a position on this? Obviously, we would not do it today, but we could put it on our October agenda. And then I just want to offer, the position doesn't necessarily mean, we support or oppose it. We can make recommendations. We can say it's really important to consider this or those kind of things. So Lindsay, I'll start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was essentially what I was going to say. Just that, could we also just support it moving forward to be put on the ballot?
Yeah, that would be an option as well, to say that we, essentially endorse this being on the ballot for voters and not necessarily a yes, no. What about other thoughts? Are there, again, we're an advisory commission. This is not a required thing. They don't need our approval, but it is something that we could take a position on because it is budget related. And I guess maybe another question, if it was up today and you had to take a position on it, or you had to suggest a statement from the BAC, does anybody have a statement like that?
Well, will we have clarity on the percentage side of things?
Yeah, so my understanding is the S version that the Assembly's put forward is that 40%. And after this meeting, we can send out those tables, because I think there was or that's something we can ask for actually.
I think it's already gone out, right?
It's in the chat, I think.
Well, I think that then it was also emailed. So. Yeah, I think oh yeah, Lila sent it around.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the question is something we want to put on our agenda for next month. Go ahead, Brian, sorry.
I was just confirming that it did go out in an email with the 40%.
Okay, I guess for me, if I mean, I don't know if we're like expressing our opinion, but with the state, making the changes on a statewide basis, and in light of the, pretty incredible inflation that has impacted folks and the, rising gas costs and everything else, it's definitely something that I would support. And I would support a BAC letter to that effect.
I would as well.
And I would like to also support something from the BAC. I just think we need to be very careful about how we broach the subject of how it will impact businesses. Because you don't want to send the perception, or at least I personally don't want to send the perception that I'm interested in passing that debt to businesses where it would be increasing their taxes unfairly.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And just to clarify, when you say debt, I think you mean like tax liability, right? Not
Right, tax liability. That should be one.
Yeah. Okay, so one approach that we could take is, well, first, just in terms of process, in order for us to pass a resolution, it needs to be drafted. Nolan and I started a draft, but we didn't fill in, we wanted to get more guidance on what folks were thinking. And so that's something we could do before the October meeting. We could share a draft resolution by email. We do have the ability to vote by email, but it seems better that we maybe would have another discussion in our October meeting. But that would be the way that we could do that. And then we could also collect feedback on that draft through LILA. The Open Meetings Act requires that we don't, conduct business by email except for votes that we can record publicly. But that's something we could do. And so we could draft it in a way to say, it sounds like not taking a position on, yes, no, whether we think voters should vote for it. We could take a statement to say that we support putting it on the ballot. And then we could also include some caveats or some things to think about. So for example, impact on people with the lowest value or lowest tier of home value, impacts on business, impacts on other shares of home value. So that's something we could do and then send it around for comments. So does that sound like a good plan?
That's something I would be in support of, yeah.
I think so.
Okay, yeah, and of course, obviously we want to give people plenty of time to read it, which is why we didn't send it out in a rush today. So I will circle back with Nolan. He was not able to be here today, but we'll get it drafted and then we will make sure to send out a draft for comments, and then we will put this on I think it's the October 13th meeting for next month. So just so folks know, then we'll be looking both at the draft budget and then that resolution. And the Assembly may have already taken action by that point. We don't know. Or they could postpone it after Tuesday's meeting, we don't know, but either way, we will focus on the statement being, assuming that it's on the ballot. And then if it doesn't pass for any reason, then we won't take action. Okay, well with that, I want to recognize that it's 5 minutes to 1. I don't see any members of the audience or public present to make a statement. And are there any closing comments from BAC members under open discussion? Okay, not seeing any. Then please just note our next scheduled meetings. We are planning to continue meeting in person, but you are also welcome to join by Teams. So we're in City Hall, 8th floor in the Mayor's Conference Room, and this is where we'll be next month. So again, thank you, and I'll look for a motion in a second to adjourn.
All motion.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we had a motion by Rob, second by Rachel. I think she beat all to it. And then if there's any objection, don't see any objection, so we will be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.